Good afternoon, change makers. Welcome to another episode of the Empower Hour. And today I am here live with the wonderful Natalie Haynes, who is a registered psychotherapist and trainer. And today we are going to be talking about a program that she created called the Comfortable Race Conversation Process. And Natalie, welcome. Let's just dive in. Can you start by telling me a little bit about yourself and how you created this program? What was the impetus for that?
Okay. Well, I'm so glad to be here. It's wonderful to be here. I just want to say that right off the bat. And yeah, let's just dive in. The so as you said, I'm a psychotherapist, and I became a therapist because I was a client. And one of the things that I started therapy because of anxiety and not really knowing, not really being able to feel comfortable in my own skin.
Mm.
And so through that process, I learned a lot about myself. But one of the things that was really important was really understanding what were all the feelings I was experiencing, the emotions, the physiological responses that happen in my body, and putting words to those, what was happening. Well, when one of the things that I came across and came to know and became highlighted in my own therapy was that I have really had an uncomfortable relationship with the concept of race. Like I couldn't talk about race, and I didn't know why. I just knew that it was something that I avoided or minimized, and it's really hard because I'm Black, and to be not able to, like, I didn't understand why I had a hard time with having this conversation about, what did it mean to be Black? What was it, what was that like, what was that like for me? So I just knew that I just had this resistance to that. So fast forward to 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, I I realized, so let me back up a little bit. I'd done a lot of therapy around this topic. Like I
Mm.
really, like I really came to know that there was a lot about my own history that I hadn't really been able to explore. And, I felt really safe to explore, first with my own therapist, and then with a therapist of color. And so, in my journey in understanding my own self, I just came to know that, wow, like I have had a lot of experiences um, that that created this inability to be able to lean into the conversation.
Mhm.
And so, um, and one of them being the first one being when I was 7 years old, and I realized, I came to know that I was Black.
Mhm.
So, my mother, I was having a birthday party, and I remember standing at the window, and I asked my mom if a friend of mine was coming to the party. And she said, no, she's probably not coming to our party because we're Black. And I remember in that moment saying, oh my gosh, like I looked at my hand and said, I'm Black. So this skin means something. And what it meant in my little 7-year-old brain was that I'm not acceptable to others. I won't be liked because of my skin color, or I will be left out because of that, my skin color. And that message was supported in what I saw in the media, in my own little brain. I didn't know that. But the thing is that that became an internalized belief, right?
Mm.
So that's what I learned through my own work, my own journey in therapy and becoming a therapist. And so now fast forward to 2020, when George Floyd was murdered. And I saw, all these people who are trying to create understanding or have a conversation or engage in a conversation. And the conversations were like, it's there wasn't a place of meeting.
Mhm.
People, there was a lot of division, and there is a lot of division when it comes to this conversation because it's a really emotionally loaded conversation. We all have a unique relationship to race. And so I
Mm,
thought to myself, how are we ever going to be able to find connection? Like, how are we ever going to find a place where we really can have a conversation about where we're different and in whether it's with teams or with a family member or with a colleague or a client, like there's all these different places where we are diverse. We're so how do we lean into those places where we're diverse? So I saw this and I thought, oh my gosh, for many of us, because this conversation is so emotional, and we really have a hard time discussing our emotions, feeling our emotions, even knowing what is happening. What does it actually feel like to have an emotion, and actually be able to stay with, to understand the language of what our body is telling us. I thought, oh my gosh, we're never going to get anywhere. We won't get to a place where we can be different and learn how to be with, someone else that's in a different place, has a different perspective of the world. So I started this program to really create a space where people could feel psychologically safe, to
mm,
feel their own experiences of their relationship to the concept of race,
mhm,
to their, their own racial identity, and so that they could actually like understand it. Like I had to understand, like, oh, I had this belief about my own self, my own race, that I was very ashamed of. But I didn't know why I thought that. I didn't know
mm,
why I felt that. I just knew that there was some shame there, and I just didn't want to go there. So I wanted to create a place where people could actually go there with, what happens for them when they are talking about their own racial identity. And it's different for every single person. Every
mhm,
person, it's different. So that's why I created the program, like really and truly, because I wanted people to be able to connect through difference. And it means starting with yourself, really, doing that inner work, not just learning something cognitively and checking a box, but really understanding, like, how does this show up in my own life? How is this, what's my internal understanding of this? And
mhm,
creating a way where people could also understand, oh, this is the emotion that I'm having, and this is why I'm having it, and this is what it's telling me.
mhm,
So this program is really a way to experientially understand what is my relationship to my race, my own skin, and that's unique for each one of us.
mhm,
And understanding that allows me to know, how do I see the other person? Like I
mhm.
have to start with myself. So that's why I created it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and, full disclosure, I got to participate in your program, and so I graduated
Yep.
and just posted the certificate for the program, and it's recognized by the Ontario, Mental
Remind
Health.
me. Oh, the Ontario Association of Mental Health Practitioners.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so
That association.
yeah,
Yeah.
so which is great, so and I know and you also, work with Gestalt, therapy modality, which is also a big part of that, and I
Yeah.
believe they've endorsed it as well, is that correct?
Yeah, like I've taught there. I've taught at a couple of this program at a couple of the different psychotherapy schools. Yeah.
Yeah, so,
It's been wonderful.
yeah, so there's a lot of, accreditation going towards this important program, in terms of, credibility, and it's being tested by those that are in your field doing
Yeah.
this work. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very confident to promote this, even though, I know that this type of topic is really uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
it's like you said, it's like taking the uncomfortable and figuring out how to make it comfortable. And I'll tell you, in the beginning, it did feel I was nervous. I was nervous to take a place at the table for those conversations. I personally identified with wanting to take this course for a number of reasons. One, obviously, I work in the DEI space, and my area that I support is for women in the workplace and in business, and unfortunately, women of color are oftentimes face additional discrimination. They have the double whammy of being a woman and a person of color.
Mhm.
So that was a reason why I really felt it was important for me to, because I really want to be an advocate, especially for women in the workplace. And so that was the impetus for taking it. But then what I realized through the whole process was my own a personal story, and that is that being adopted, um I think I struggled with a sense of belonging as a child, and feeling, that like I couldn't really show up as my full self because I didn't really necessarily know who I was,
Mhm.
and I'm like I have I have an amazing adopted mom, and very, very close to her, but we are so different. In personality. And I did find my birth family in the second half of my life, and so I felt that sense of belonging, but also the not feeling like I fit into my birth family because I wasn't raised with them,
Right.
and we're from different provinces. And so I really struggled with my own identity throughout my life, and I think that it wasn't until getting into my late 40s and early 50s that I really felt like I I had to take this challenge on to really talk about some of these identity issues that are really important, because if we don't feel comfortable in our skin, it holds us back in so many areas of our life. And I think,
Totally.
imposter syndrome becomes
Right.
a much bigger issue for people who feel that they don't belong. And like we talked about in the program, it's amazing when you go out into the world and you see that. For me personally, being a white person, I go into the world and I see people that are look like me, and I am very aware that especially in smaller communities, that a lot of people like yourself don't feel represented. Uh,
Mhm.
and so you've done a great justice in bringing this conversation from being a taboo topic to one that requires us to talk about it. And your um, great approach, therapeutic approach, trauma informed approach, really made it comfortable to tackle that. So can you explain what the comfortable race conversation process is and how it differs to other approaches discussing race?
Yes. So the the program is a 7-week program that's comprised of 2 parts. So there's one part that is an asynchronous learning piece, which is pre-recorded videos and some supplementary homework that has been that I've created, and or pulled from different pieces, like different areas, in order to um, which is like the background. That's the background information.
Mhm.
And then the second part of the program is the practice circles. So that's where the members of the group, who are comprised of different races, will meet to explore, and that's facilitated by myself. And in those practice circles that are 90 minutes, we explore the content that people have consumed the week before. So over the 7-week period, you have a place where you can actually explore and understand, what is your relationship? What is the exploring your own racial identity and your relationship to the concept of race,
Mhm.
and actually like taking the perspective inward and noticing what happens with me when I have this conversation. Where are the places where I, where does privilege show up within myself? Where does unconscious bias show up, in my life?
Mhm.
But this is where it's different. And I don't have any, I'm not saying anything about any other programs, but
Right.
where I start is one, creating psychological safety, and two, having a conversation about our emotions and how we process information from the outside world, how our
Mm.
brains work when it comes to, how we think, how the unconscious actually gets created, our somatic psychological responses to another person. And by starting there and really slowing down how we process information, I believe, and I've seen that it actually gives us the awareness that, the participants need in order to have those more difficult conversations. Like that's the trauma informed piece. Like racism is a traumatic thing that has happened to all of us. We've been told stories about each other, and we don't know all the stories we've been told about each other and ourselves.
Mhm.
And that has created a lot of pain, or a lot of avoidance, or a lot of shame, or a lot of all kinds of feelings. So we really need to know what is happening to me in this present moment while I'm having this conversation with another person. That's the place to start, because if we don't, we're either people are trying to be right or trying to be heard or trying to, and we're not really talking about, you know, seeing one person for the entirety of who they are and what they might be feeling, how they might be feeling missed, or when that's happening for us. We
Mhm.
need to slow down the conversation and start with, where are we psychologically? What are the emotions that I'm actually feeling? And it
Mhm.
wasn't an overly emotional conversation, right? But what are the things that I'm experiencing that inform me about how I'm hearing the person who's in front of me, what it feels like to say whatever my history or story about my own example with race with another person, and then to hear what's it like, how does that impact the next person, how do they hear it,
Mhm.
you know like I'll give you an example just to make it a bit more clear for the listeners.
Sure.
Like when you think about your first memory of race, like I spoke about mine,
Yes.
first moment that you noticed your own race or the race of another person.
Mhm.
And and my husband's white, and I asked him, when did you notice that you were white? And he's like, I didn't. He goes, but I did notice. He goes, I do know the moment when I realized I had freckles, because he's kind of got curly red hair, and he's strawberry
Interesting.
blonde, he says, and some freckles, because a man came up to him and said, oh, what happened? You get caught behind a screen door in the sun. And from that moment he hated his freckles.
Mm.
But that's how these little moments get they create beliefs that we have about ourselves or we have about others,
Mhm.
you know so my
Defining.
they're defining moments, and we don't always know that we have them until we actually explore. And so
Yes.
this self-exploration, helps to uncover, what are the beliefs I have? What are the thoughts I have that I didn't know that I had?
Yeah.
How did I interpret that moment when when it came to race?
Mhm.
That's the self-inquiry that we need to do. And
Mhm.
so creating a place where people can feel safe to know, oh my gosh, I felt this thing about this person, or I believe that. There needs to be a place where people can actually feel that, so they can say, I actually don't agree with this anymore, and I'm going to let it go. Or, I actually don't, I have that thought sometimes, but do I actually believe it? Like, so that you actually have some space to get curious and decide and have a choice. Do I still want to hold this, or, do I just, it's it's old, you know, that was a belief I had when I was 7 years old. I don't have that anymore as an adult.
Mhm.
We need to have that space where we can actually explore because, you know, as a therapist, I know that clients, they're not going to go to an emotional place if they don't feel this, if they haven't decided to do that. They're not going to feel something unless they're ready to feel it. Trauma's trauma. We're not pushing anybody to feel something that they're not ready to feel. And when it comes to feeling really difficult emotions, we need to feel safe. We need
Oh my god.
to feel safe. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I can't think of a better person to create a safe environment. At least, like, I experienced that safe environment, and yeah, I I looked forward to the conversation, the practice circle every Friday because it was like unpeeling traumatic feelings and having a safe space, and also the other stories, right? The storytelling amongst all of the other participants gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Because it was just so interesting. Every participant brought such a rich experience to it. Um, and I think right now, maybe we could talk about, I saw a video of someone who I follow who was saying about feeling, she was wearing the Star of David, and she was saying how it's crazy to think that wearing this right now is a symbol of bravery, right? To go out.
Right.
And I had
Yeah.
students say the same thing to me, that they shared uh, that they're not comfortable sharing what their race is because of all of the upheaval across the world going on with the war and whatnot. And it just broke my heart that
Yeah.
people are having to hide themselves in 2024.
Yeah.
But that is essentially what's happening.
It's happening. That's what's happening. Exactly. And so, like, the meaning that gets created because of this, because of what's happening in the world, like the context of it, the,
Mhm,
the associations that we make, what we believe, how that
mhm,
gets attributed to, somebody's, the color of someone's skin, a necklace that someone's wearing,
mhm,
um, who you love, um, you know, where you went to school, like all of these different stories that are attributed to something that might not actually be true about the person who's in front of you. Like,
mhm,
and we can, so our ability to slow down and notice, how am I seeing this moment? How am I showing up to this moment? And what makes me show up to this moment and this person in the way that, that I am? Like, I'll give you an example. My son said to me, so my kids look white. Um, they're Jamaican, and they're half of me and half of my husband, but they happen to just have lighter skin.
right.
And he said to me, well, can Black people be racist? And I said, well, it depends on the definition that you're using. If it's looking at things from a systemic, you know, perspective, then no, because there's a, systemically, people, one race has been seen to be better than other races, and or vice versa. Other races are seen as better and some are less than and whatnot. From that perspective, how society has been built, there is that. So no, but can Black people be prejudiced? Could they prejudge somebody about who and how they are based on their skin? Yeah, like that can happen, you know?
Mhm,
So for my son, he may have people who might look at him and, I said to him, I would never want anybody to judge you based on the color of your skin because they don't know you. He has
mhm,
this experience where he's got, Black grandparents and white grandparents and, my sister's are both married to my one sister's married to an Asian man, the other one's married to a black man, so he's got Asian cousins and black cousins. Like, you would never know that unless you actually, got curious about the person who's in front of you, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you were talking about this, that, somebody wearing that, it's like that does become that necklace has a story that's attached to it. And being brave is actually saying, whatever story that you have, that's not me.
Yes.
That's not me.
Yeah.
So really, we need to slow down and really get curious about, how do we see somebody? How are we interpreting how we see the world? And getting curious, how have I interpreted how I've seen the world, and what beliefs have I created because of that?
Hmm.
That's the stuff that's in the unconscious.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, oh, what are some common misconceptions people have about talking about race, and how do we address these misconceptions?
Well, I did a lot of research when I was creating this program, and I asked a lot of people of different races, what, how do you feel about having a conversation about race?
Mhm.
And it was so interesting. It didn't matter what race they are. Everyone said, I'm really nervous to have a conversation about race because I am nervous that I'm going to say the wrong thing. Someone else is
Yeah.
going to say the wrong thing. And really, it's the imagined future. Like, it's how I imagine what will happen after we start this conversation, whether I say something or the other person's going to say something to me, and then how do I deal with that? So,
Mm,
right. And so I think there's a lot of people that actually want to know how to have a conversation about race. I think it's something that many organizations deal with right now. Oh,
mm,
there's been a lot of training that's been done,
mhm,
and people are like, great, I have all this information, but now what?
mhm,
Now what do I do? How do I speak to the person who's in front of me? And that's where, the human language, our humanity, what makes us human, all these pieces that I want to explore with people, that's where we are the same.
mhm.
Like, we all feel stuff, we all feel uncomfortable, our breath gets taken away, we get nervous and afraid of what might happen.
Yeah.
And so that's that's what I do as a therapist. So to take it out of a therapy room and create the psychoeducation around, like, this is what happens to us. It's a way to create a common language for us
Mhm,
to connect.
mhm,
It's where we're the same. There's a lot where we're different, but this is one place where we're the same. And
mhm,
so having people learn how to connect on that level, that's what I want to create. I want people to
mhm.
be able to feel confident, because once people have, and I mean, you noticed from our group, that cohort, by the
Yeah.
end of it, people love having a conversation. They love talking about this stuff. It's
Yeah,
so
we got
possible to
over
have
our
a
fear.
conversation.
We got over our fears.
Yeah.
We found common understanding and connection with each other. And everybody was so diverse in that group. It was amazing,
Yeah.
and really eye opening, and brave, very brave,
Very
very
brave.
brave.
Yeah.
Uh, so let, I think there's something going on in the world right now, and maybe you've studied this more than I have, but schools are now rethinking their diversity in classrooms. So the admissions processes are changing, and there's been talk about, is DEI dead? Um, and uh, you know, some pretty major players are saying some pretty negative things about diversity in the workplace. Elon Musk being one, so you'll never see me
Yeah.
buying a Tesla. Uh, so, what do you think is going on there? What, like, because we seem like we were making such progress, and now everybody's talking about that we're all afraid. yeah, we're defunding it. And what's going
Yeah.
on?
Truthfully, I feel like what my belief is that this psychoeducation piece is something that's needed. That's
Mhm.
what I think is missing,
Okay.
because and I don't think how do I say this? Um, these are not easy conversations. It's not comfortable to have these conversations because when we become aware of what we've internalized, what we also become aware of, what I became aware of is how much pain has been caused, how much um, how much hasn't been seen.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of sometimes the DEI training can be like, you have to see this. You have to see this. This is all the stuff that you haven't seen. And because you haven't seen this, it's made you racist and a supremacist and all of these things.
Mhm.
And so people in their everyday life are like, I don't feel like I'm a racist. Like, I don't, white people might say, I don't feel like I'm a racist. I don't feel like I'm, perpetrating this thing. I don't know what you're talking about. And so for someone to lean into that conversation, to have some understanding, it's like, it's almost like you have to, um, you got to just buck up and go right in.
Mhm.
Right? Like you have to, it's like you got to go in knowing that you're wrong or whatever. And I believe there are people who can do that, who will lean in. However, as a therapist, I know that when I'm sitting in front of somebody, I could say, you need to feel that thing. You need to process what that is in order for you to get through whatever it is that you're working through. But that
Mhm.
would never work. I would never ever do that. It's like pushing someone's face into their feelings and they may not be ready.
Mhm.
And so because of the shame that can come. So, it has to be a trauma informed approach.
Yeah.
And because it's traumatic for all of us,
Mhm.
in different ways. And it's either you've been experiencing as a racialized person, you've experienced it your whole life, and you just want people to get it so people can be connected, to have equality, to, right the wrongs, to like so everybody can get a fair shake, right?
Mhm.
And shoot, I just forgot what I was going to say. Oh, but if you're white and you're just learning this and you realize, oh my gosh, these are things that I've believed, these are the things that were said in my family, this is the places where I would frequent and I never thought twice about it. Here's all these underlying beliefs I've always had. Ugh, what does it mean about me as a person? There
Mhm.
needs to be a space for someone to feel all of that too, because
Yeah.
we don't put ourselves in shame-based situations on purpose. We don't touch hot stoves on purpose.
No.
So there has to be a way for people to feel that, because if you've got trauma anywhere else in your life, your body will respond and say no before your cognitively will.
Yes. Yeah. You shut down before you even realize you shut down.
So that's what I think is happening. I think that there's so many people who are, they've done the training or they've done, and if it's presented in a way where there's, people have to, like, it's like a shock and awe kind of approach.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's all like that. Please hear me when I say that. But
Right.
what I do believe is that there needs to be a place for people to understand, why am I so uncomfortable? As opposed to, it's just, as an example, white fragility. It's just, because I'm fragile. That's why I can't have this conversation. No, I just totally disagree. I totally disagree. I think it needs to be a place where people can understand. You might feel resistance because you're really afraid, or you're afraid you might hurt me, or you're afraid you might, that you've you have been racist and you didn't realize it, you know.
Mhm.
So, or there was racism in your family and you're coming to terms with that, whatever it is, but it's the same for me. I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want to be Black. So how do I show up in my own skin with my own family and not want to be that? Seeing myself as less than,
Mhm.
and trying to pull away from my identity. Like, that was very shameful.
Mhm.
So I couldn't do that in a way where someone was going to say, "What kind of person are you that would do that?" I would never have put myself in that situation. My body would never have allowed me to. But once I understood what was coming, why I felt the way that I did, where it emerged from, and was able to give myself some grace that, I just inhaled all of these stories like we all did. I was able to say, okay, you know what? It happened. And now what?
Right.
How do I continue to be in this place where I'm aware and looking at what am I internalizing? What am I thinking? How am I seeing the person who's in front of me and questioning it?
Mhm.
Doesn't matter who they are or how they are. It's all aspects of identity. So that's the piece that, we have to find this middle ground where we have a common language to deal with what this pond we've all been put into,
Mhm.
right? So, oh, somebody's,
Yes, we have a conversation being added, so I'm going to add this overlay here, and so that you can see the conversation. So Heather Oliver has said that she finds that DEI in the workplace is very comfortable for white people, and perhaps that is why the evolution isn't happening, or don't see value. Uncomfortable conversations are happening in other spaces where I feel there is progress. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point.
mhm,
Yeah. Um, and then she goes
yeah,
on to say, I really love adding the word belonging to the emotions that have powerful meanings. I agree. I think belonging really, because it's a human need. We all
human
need
need.
to feel like we belong.
Mhm,
Full stop.
yeah,
Full
mhm,
stop. And I was sending you a message about
yeah,
the
yeah,
Rat Pack
oh,
documentary.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
I saw that,
And,
yeah.
sorry, yeah, is it the Rat Pack? Am I saying
Brat Pack,
Rat
rats,
Pack? I know, I'm
yeah,
like, wait a minute, I know I don't have this right. The Brat Pack. And that was such an interesting look at pulp culture. And of course it was about whether these actors in that were very popular, like all of the Breakfast Club and all the Hughes movies, whether they were given a bad rap of being entitled young actors, and how they felt that really changed how they were perceived in the world. But the part of the documentary that I found so fascinating was the fact that they were all white actors, and people of color were not represented in mainstream teenage culture.
yeah,
um, to me, you asked that question earlier on about when was the first time that you realized your race. And for me, I grew up in a really small town in Peterborough, and I went to school uh in the country. And I think I was in I want to say maybe grade 5, or maybe slightly younger. And there was a black boy that started in our school, and I remember feeling so sad for him because he was the only person in the school that was of color. And I just couldn't even imagine what that must have felt like. But, when
mhm,
hearing people like him reflect back on that as adults, it's really, I know, of course, I never did see him after we left school. So I have no idea how, certainly something was never spoken about. Right.
right,
Um,
exactly.
but I remember that moment. I remember feeling like, wow, I wonder what that must feel like.
Mhm,
And I think
yeah,
that is unfortunately, and then there's this whole conversation around, well, we're Canadians, we're not racist. Or, you look at how we treated our Indigenous and still continue to treat our Indigenous, and how we still continue to treat people of country people of color in this country. It's still an issue. And yet it's like we don't want to face that
Yeah.
we're far from perfect, that there is tons of
Yes.
room for
Yes.
improvement.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think until we're willing to realize that we have very similar um, ways in which we've treated people that are different here in Canada, just as much as in the U.S. I personally think that we that it's just not publicized like it is in the U.S.
Yeah.
Until more
I agree.
recently. Until more recently,
Yeah.
but even then, I think there's a lot of people who feel like we're not doing all of the harmful things like they are in other countries, especially the US. And I think that thinking is wrong.
Yeah. Well, because it gets people to, people can say, it's like saying, I see everybody as the same. I don't see color. Right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so it's a way to kind of opt out and not actually look at, um, to look at your own self and say, how have I internalized all of this? Like, there's no way that we cannot be impacted by the discussion um, of race. Like it's happens for all of us. And, I just want to say one thing about your comment, Heather. Um, I think it probably is comfortable in a sense because I think a lot of the training can be quite cognitive. Like, here's what unconscious bias means. Here's what it means to, have privilege. Here's what it means to. And so you're almost looking at it outside of yourself, not necessarily looking at how it shows up within yourself. Right.
Mm,
And also including what happens in my body when I even think about this, or what happens in my body when I go to have a conversation, like really getting into this is the present, this is the process that's happening to me while I'm having this conversation. That awareness is key, huge, you know. So, and because that's happening at the exact same time that you're saying anything. So if you're walking into a conversation and you're holding yourself because you're afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing, all your whole body and everything is all wrapped up into I got to make sure I don't say the wrong thing, so I'm going to work really hard to not say the wrong thing, as opposed to looking at the person in front of you and actually looking at them and seeing what is required. How can I respond to the person who's in front of me? What am I actually curious about them? Like, what do I, what's the reason I'm asking this question and the why I'm asking it? Like, that's all underneath the words that we use. And so being able to explore that is huge, but we need to have a safe space to explore it,
mhm,
So, like, you'll remember in the program, a lot of times I'd say to you, just notice what you experience right before you go into the breakout session.
mhm,
Like, you might notice that you're holding your breath.
mhm.
What's that about? There's some words to that. And
Yeah.
then it's so transformative to hear that, what, the person you were about to speak to, they're holding their breath too, because they're worried about how you might see them.
Mhm.
So it's bringing the humanness back to our conversation, you know, and yeah. And I read this, there's a book called, it's by Susan Wood, and it's a quote from her book called Fierce Conversations. And she
Mm,
says, the conversation is the relationship. We're either creating the relationship and expanding our relationship, or we are that relationship is breaking down one conversation at a time. So we got to know how we show up to the conversation with whoever you're in relationship with, and especially as leaders too,
yes,
right?
yes. So that's a great segue. What can leaders do in organizations, big and small, to create, because of course there's committees,
Yeah.
I'm sure that a lot of people that are impacted by these things kind of feel like, oh, everyone's going to come to me and ask me how I feel about, this and that because I'm a person of color and now I'm on display,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know. So how can leaders do the work and not make it traumatic for those that um are impacted by it the most, which is the people that are diverse in the workplace?
That's a great question. So where the work is becoming a self-inclusive leader. So I didn't say this at the beginning, but I've also created a Udemy course that is it's a 2-hour shortened version of my program. And it's it's self-directed, it's asynchronous, but it as a leader, it's understanding all of those different parts of you. Like when it comes to our identity, we have all these different parts that make up who we are.
Mhm.
And so as a woman, you and I'll have different thoughts, beliefs, in terms of how we show up in our gender, in that group membership. As in race, we have different races, but how we show up to that like how we our identity is related to all of our different thoughts and experiences. So a leader really needs to know how do they include all of those different aspects of themselves? What are those different parts of themselves, and what are the thoughts and beliefs and feelings that they have about themselves? If you're not able to include and know all of these parts of you, you won't know what you won't be seeing with the other person,
Mm.
right? You won't know how you may be not seeing someone else and their different aspect of their their identity. So, um, like, I'll give you an example. Um, I had a HR leader who had taken my program, and she she's a director in her organization, and she hadn't shared as much, like she hadn't like really, you know, been as vulnerable in the group. However, she was pretty engaged. So by the end of the program, she said, um, she's like, "Oh, I had a conversation with an employee, and I think I said the wrong thing." I was like, "Okay, well, what did you say?" So she said, well, she had a new employee who's from Nigeria. This person was white. And she said to this new employee from Nigeria, "Oh, so you must be here to build a better life for yourself."
Oh.
And and her intention, how she was telling the story, she was like, just trying to be, familiar, not familiar, I guess, and like, try to be welcoming, like just try to, oh, I know that this is what happening. This might be happening for you because, you know, whatever. I'm aware, whatever it might be. Anyway, because she had been doing this work to notice what's happening within herself,
Mhm.
how she has experienced, like what it feels like to slow down, to notice her own unconscious bias, to know what happens to me emotionally and psychologically when I'm looking at, you know, the world in front of me. How have
Mhm.
I seen people? What are the stereotypes I may have held? Where did they come from? Because she had been doing that work, as soon as she said those words, she noticed something in her employee's face. And
Mhm.
she just noticed something, and she said, and it left an imprint, because anytime we have a conversation, we feel ourselves in that conversation if we allow ourselves, right?
Mhm.
We know when we've said something that isn't okay, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we allow ourselves to. So this is what she says in the group. And I said, well, she says, I just feel something and I can't shake it. And I said, well, you don't actually know if it's better for her here. And she goes, yeah, right. And she's like, I made an assumption. I said, yep. So she called me a week after. She's like, Natalie, I got to tell you something. And she shared that she went back to her employee, uh, a woman named Ngozi, and she said, I made a mistake. I, I made this assumption about you, and that was wrong. And the woman said, yes, actually, like back home, we had, wealth. We had a nanny. We had all our friends and family. We had all kinds of things that, made our home our home. We left because of other reasons, political unrest, and made a decision to come to Canada. And
Mhm.
so, the participant in the program, this HR director, was like, "I'm so sorry." And, the interesting thing is that this employee was like, "No, no, no, it's okay, it's okay." Because she wanted to take care of, this her new boss, and she didn't want her to feel bad. However, the HR director was like, "You know what? No, I actually said the wrong thing. I didn't notice you. I was trying to be a good boss,
Mhm.
and I didn't really ask and get curious about who you are." She said, "No, it's not okay. I am so sorry." And she says to me, "Natalie," like, she had tears in her eyes and she hugged me. I'm like, "That's amazing." So she was able to transform this one moment by just acknowledging what she was experiencing within herself,
Mhm.
and acknowledging how did I impact this person in front of me? And then also having the capacity to feel when she got it wrong, to
Yeah.
feel like the shame of it, and, creating and having an impact that wasn't intended. Like, we have to acknowledge that within ourselves in order to validate the other person and the beauty of who they are, right?
Mhm.
And in doing that, she really allowed this employee to, like, just to feel seen, feel
Mm.
seen.
Yes, because we make mistakes and we learn from them. That's what makes us human, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so that's a beautiful redo. A beautiful redo.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
And we shouldn't be afraid to take on a redo, right? And
no,
maybe it won't make a difference in that particular situation. Maybe the person will continue to feel angry and upset, but at least you know that you've tried to do the right thing.
yeah.
So it's super awkward for everybody, you still have to do the right thing.
You still have
So
to
I
do
love
the right
that
thing.
story. I love that story.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and he transformed they transformed the relationship. Like, it has been a beautiful working relationship because she has a boss who acknowledged her and was
yes,
able to have that conversation. Like, that's huge, right?
I can definitely say that I've had awkward mess ups with people,
Me too.
and being able to be honest and share when you've made a mistake can strengthen a relationship. Like there is that psychological safety there after experiencing where you've put your foot in your mouth, but you owned it. You owned it. You didn't try to make excuses. You own it, and you do better. You do
Yeah,
better.
yeah.
I like that so much. So looking ahead, how do you see comfortable race conversation process evolving, and what impact do you hope will will it have on communities and workplaces? And if you
Well,
have a success, I think you have a success. I think you just shared a success story, but if there's anything else you want to share about it,
yeah.
including telling us about your next cohort.
Yeah.
So,
Well, back to the leadership piece, like that, understanding and owning and being able to take responsibility around this topic is huge. And I think that there's a lot of comfort when you know what made this uncomfortable in the first place, right? So what my hope is really to have people, like, I want people to know that it's possible to have conversations about race. And I
mhm,
want people to understand what are the feelings and thoughts and emotions that are getting in the way. Because when you can own that within yourself, it is so, it's empowering, and it is, you embody all of you. And actually, let me say that in a different way. I Once I was able to know what I resisted within myself, I could embody all of me and redefine how I saw myself as a Black person, as a Black woman, right?
Mm.
I want each person, no matter what your race is, to be able to embody all of who they are and create how they want to show up as their race in the world, as opposed to what the world, what society has said, what we've been told about each other, but to really be able to embody so you can actually connect with the person who's in front of you. Like really create connection with the person in front of you. But you got to start with what you weren't seeing within yourself. So,
Mhm. Oh,
yeah.
another great little segue came in from Heather, who's listening to the conversation. If we started having conversations as parents with our kids, especially white families, this would help to normalize these discussions. And I think since today is the first day back to school, what advice would you give to parents and teachers
Yeah.
uh, to support everyone feeling comfortable, that they fully belong in their school communities, within their families?
Yeah. That's a great, yeah, because it's okay, my advice is slow down and notice notice how you think about other people. Notice what you're experiencing when you're talking to someone. Get curious about your own self and really like get curious about who the person is in front of you, because I guarantee you there's places where we're making those quick assumptions,
Mhm,
or there's places where you might want to have a conversation with someone and you feel the tightness inside because you're like, ugh, I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing about this.
mhm,
And then you feel yourself kind of back up. And I want to normalize that that's a normal thing that happens for every single person,
mhm,
like even outside of the conversation about race, but it happens everywhere. Like if we feel inferior or we feel anxious or we feel insecure at times in our life, we will shrink,
mm,
or have some kind of response that our body is telling us about that,
mhm,
right? Whatever's going on for us. But in this conversation about race, notice it, because we can easily avoid it because it's difficult or hard, right?
yeah,
And yeah, and when it comes to exactly when it so Heather, like in response to your comment, understanding yourself. Like if you want to be a parent and that supports these conversations and normalize these conversations, you got to know, you know, where do I find it difficult in my own life,
mhm,
right? Kids can talk about this, but it's how do we where what are we saying and not saying? Where are the places that our unconscious bias might be showing, you know, and knowing how to address it and knowing how to have the conversation or create support for the people who are in your life when they're feeling whatever they're feeling about a conversation, that's important. Like so you have to starting with you is the way. And it's even for mixed families, right? Because, you might be a white parent and a child of color, and you're going to have a totally different relationship to the concept of race than your child will. Even though you want everybody to be happy and feel the same way, the reality is that people see each other differently, you know? And what's that like? What does it feel like to be in that place? And I think sometimes we're so worried about how we might, that someone is going to feel bad or feel sad or whatever, that we do too much work. We try to make it go away as opposed to being able to support the person who's in front of us, or the
mhm,
child in front of us, the employee who's in front of us. You know, it's okay to feel not okay, but it's just knowing how.
mhm.
Yeah.
So as a
Yeah.
teacher, how would you create a safe space within your classroom?
Well, I have another example that I think that's really great. I had a teacher who took my program,
Oh,
and
great.
so she was a white person,
Mhm,
and she had a class that had there was a lot of Black kids, and she had they were probably about grade 8ish, and so the board had sent some information for um, Black History Month. So she was taking my program at the time. She said, you know what? She took the information. She's like, ugh, I feel uncomfortable now having this conversation because of what she's been learning. And she's like, I don't want to say this in the wrong way. So what
Mm,
she said she said, I feel really icky having this conversation. And all the kids were like, whoa, miss, like, I can't believe you said that. So some of the
mm,
other kids were like, let her talk, let her talk. And she said, I'm a 43-year-old white woman. She's like, this has been given to me and we're supposed to do something with this. She said, but I don't have like, I don't, I want to know what you guys think about Black History Month. I just don't want to put it out as what we're supposed to do.
yeah.
So she asked the question, how do you all feel about Black History Month? And she said she got answers from, I hate it, or I think it should be Black History Month every day,
Mm,
or I feel really uncomfortable talking about it. So she was able to create a conversation where the kids, could actually talk about their own experiences. And she said, I never would have been able to do that before.
mhm,
She had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, to
mm,
know that it is different and you can't really change it, but you can be there for what somebody's experiencing around this topic. And so that's what teachers can do. Get curious about what you're experiencing around this conversation, because your ability to be with those places, those emotions, allows you to create the space for kids to be with those emotions. When we want to jump in and fix and take care of and make it better because we don't want somebody to think we're racist or that it's bad or da 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 da, we are not allowing for the other person just to have their experience of how they're, like Black History Month in that example, yeah, how they're noticing that different moment, right?
mm.
So I think it's like pausing and just getting curious about you start with yourself. You'll definitely see more when it comes to what's happening in your classroom, for sure.
Okay, well, that was a great way to wrap up this conversation. It's just the beginning, and
Yeah,
obviously, hopefully, some of our listeners will want to explore taking this program, whether it be your Udemy course, which is a smaller version that's self directed, or the full program with the weekly. Um, Circles where you and I have to say the course materials on the portal were so useful. I learned so much
oh,
through the process.
that's so good.
The resources, yeah, it really helped me to feel more confident to do this work, more confident. I think that's really important, because when we're not confident to do something, then we were like, well, who am I to do this? Like, I remember telling you, I was so worried about being seen as a white savior, like
Yeah,
that's, I just, and that's the last thing that I want to come across as.
mhm.
And, but I want to be a part of the conversation. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. We need more
Well,
people to be in the conversation.
yeah, so I challenged my thinking around that, and I'm really glad that I did. I don't even know if I could have had this conversation even a couple months ago, because I would have been too worried about what people thought, and and am I opening up a can of worms, and what's how are am I going to get negative feedback? And at this stage in the game, I said it last week in our Empower Hour. I really truly don't care what people
Yeah,
think. It's none of my business, and
yeah,
I'm going to continue doing the work that I do because I know it makes a difference. And if I didn't do it, then I wouldn't let people know about the incredible work that you're doing. So it's
yeah.
my duty to brave and take this on so that I can give you a voice here in my Empower Hour. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's been an incredible conversation. I think that you,
We should say when it starts. When it starts. That's
Please, yes.
October the 4th.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that was where I was going to lead the conversation as our ending point, is for you to just share your final words on how they can take the course, and yeah, just you
Yeah.
wrap things up for us.
Okay. So there'll be a link that you can use that to sign up for the program. It starts October the 4th. That's when, so every week there's a module that is emailed to your inbox with all of the information. And then starting October the 11th from 10 to 11:30 is the first practice circle. And there's 6 practice circles after that that will be facilitated by myself. So, if you're interested, click the link, and then I'll also send you the link for the Udemy course.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's a self-directed learning. But for the comfortable race conversation process, that's really where, I shouldn't say that's the only place. It can happen in the Udemy course too, but there's nothing like real time knowing what you're experiencing while you're having a conversation. So
Yeah, the Udemy course is a great primer, and
yeah,
the but I think that for us to get comfortable, we have to talk to other people about what we're experiencing and learning, and that's where the practice circles allow us to do the real work.
yeah,
So it's if
yeah,
you can do that particular version of it, I think that you'll get a lot more out of it than just the self-directed. But either are great. You just have to go to what you can do. Um, whether it be the short self-directed or the full program, either way, you are making a step towards empowering others to have their voices heard.
yeah.
So thank you so much. All of the links and everything that we talked about today will be available to you. So, and if you have further questions, for those of you who were listening, that listen to it after the fact, after the live recording is done, feel free to tag us so that we can answer any questions that you have. So
Yes.
thanks again. It's been a very empowering hour, and Natalie, it's oh, and where's the best place to find out more from you about you in general? Just
I'll add all my social channels in.
mhm.
So whether it's LinkedIn
Mhm.
or
So they can
Instagram,
find you, Natalie Haynes, therapist,
Natalie
if they
Haynes Consulting. Yeah.
yeah,
Natalie Haynes Consulting on Instagram and Natalie Haynes Consulting on LinkedIn also, or just Natalie Haynes on LinkedIn. So
great.
yeah.
And your website, just we'll shout out your website.
My website is in the process of being created. So
Okay. Okay. So
yeah.
okay, no
Yeah.
worries, no worries. But we do have the Kajabi
Yeah.
website address.
Yeah.
What's that link? Do you know that?
That's well, I'll add it in. It's bit.ly the comfortable race conversation process.
Okay, Bitly, the comfortable race conversation.
Not the bit.ly comfortable race conversation process.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks
Yeah.
everyone.